Welcome to The Chat. Come behind the inbound scenes of some of the world's fastest growing companies. For the past 10 years as Chatmetrics, we've had an exclusive inside view of how these industry leaders are revolutionising inbound marketing and sales across diverse sectors. Each week, we bring you conversations with top minds in marketing and sales who share insider secrets and strategies for driving inbound success. Join us on The Chat, your front row seat to the future of inbound. Today on The Chat, we're diving deep into the fine line between automation and authenticity with Daniel Glickman, a product marketing leader, sales enablement strategist, and big picture thinker who's currently writing a book on the cognitive and societal impacts of AI. Daniel's not just working with AI, he's challenging how we integrate it, questioning what we delegate, and helping teams stay smart about the guardrails they put in place. We talk about how AI is reshaping the way we think, why trust and good judgment are more important than ever, and the hidden dangers companies walk into when they confuse automation with intelligence. This one's not just for marketers, it's for anyone trying to lead through the next wave of disruption. Daniel, welcome to The Chat.
Thank you, and thanks to be here. And hi, everyone.
You're writing a book that tackles the cognitive and societal shifts created by AI. Can you give us the elevator pitch? What are you trying to unpack here?
This is a great first practice at pitching it. The book compares the communication revolution, the digital communication revolution, and AI as an extension of it, or the second wave of it, to previous communication revolutions, which led to societal, religious, and political revolutions after. And so if we look at, for example, the invention of radio, how it empowered communism and fascism in the 1930s, the new digital technologies and AI in particular are empowering new ways of communicating, thinking, perceiving the world. And this has profound effects across the board in political thought today, in religious thinking, and how we as humans delegate our own thinking and authority to algorithms, and now I think way more so to AI, right? AI is profoundly more impactful than, say, social media, but we're just at the beginning of it. And so the book looks into the various aspects of these changes and looks into some possible outcomes in the near future.
With the messaging, or with the invention of the radio and then social media, I see that almost as like a megaphone for people to be able to put their point across and become much louder. AI is slightly different to that, isn't it? It's not necessarily a megaphone.
Correct. AI takes the element of what we call fragmented realities, or we as marketers leverage the other side of it, which we call personalization, and really turbocharges that. And so we look to AI for answers about the reality around us. And more people are doing so when instead of using Google search, they're using ChatGPT nowadays, or they're just asking AI instead of going to Wikipedia, which replaced the proper encyclopedia, right? And so we're more and more relying on AI to give us answers about the reality around us, which in the business world includes how to do things, or what are best practices, or write for me an outbound email, right? And so implicit to that is, what are the best practices for writing an outbound email? And this is what everybody else is doing, right? And so what it does is it creates two things. One, it builds the bubble around us of the fragmented reality. Well, my reality might be different than yours, because AI is really helping surround me with the information I see displayed in a way I want to see it. And it does it across everything, right? The other thing is, I'm more likely to delegate many more cognitive functions to AI than I was to, say, a social feed, or to just to play out the algorithm. So if you think about it, like what Google Maps did for us, or Waze, Apple Maps, all of these, they didn't just digitize the physical map. We delegated many of our decision-making processes. How do we get from here to there? What time should I leave? How do I avoid traffic? What are the names of these streets? A lot of these things we delegated over to the system. We don't remember the street names as much as we used to. We don't really think about these things as much, right? And AI is doing it in a much higher level because oftentimes we don't sit down to think about, hey, what are the best practices about writing an outbound email, and why should I exactly do it this way? And do I have my own original ideas about figuring out something slightly better or much better, right? No, we just delegate it and we assume, yeah, AI knows best. And so it does. And more, in some ways, it is becoming a authoritative part of our life. And then the philosophical question becomes, who is really managing who?
When I guess it's interesting you talk about the memory aspect or handing over skills. I early in my career had a role I had to make 52 phone calls every morning to the same 52 numbers. And I did that for nearly a year. It was a tedious task, but it was part of my role and responsibilities at the time. But one of the side effects was that I remembered every single one of those 52 numbers. And so it was a bit of a party trick that I carried on through the rest of my life until all of a sudden I realized one day that I'd started to forget some of these numbers. And I thought that there might have actually been something wrong because I was forgetting big chunks of these numbers. And actually saw my physician, went to the doctor and said, "Is there something wrong with my mind?" And we went through a bit of an analysis because we're talking about 10 years later that this happened. And I thought there might have been some deterioration. We turned out it was because of this thing. It was because I had a mobile phone and all of the numbers that I needed were being stored in the mobile phone. And so that part of my brain that was actually storing all of these numbers had relinquished and said, well, I don't need to do this anymore. And I thought that was quite fascinating. Today, I couldn't even tell you one of those numbers. It's been a few years since then, obviously. But for me, that was the first experience, I think, of technology being a useful tool, but changing my mind, changing the way that my brain was actually working for me.
That's right. And this very specific example, you could argue, doesn't really point to changing the way you think, but it points to how much you need to remember in this somewhat trivial task. But it's still the idea of how to figure out what the phone number is and understanding phone numbers and how phones work was stay the same. Right. I think there's definitely an associated change, cognitive shift with it. With like, do I even need to know phone numbers? I don't even know my family's phone numbers anymore. I just have a speed dial on my phone and I just don't know the numbers. But if you think about it, in a societal change, when nowadays that led to a situation, this very trivial little data point of, yeah, it's easy to store phone numbers, led to a situation where nowadays the phone system itself for young people is secondary or tertiary to the FaceTime and WhatsApp call or whatever system is at play at that moment. It's really not so the concept of the phone number has diminished in importance. And FaceTime is by far more popular with younger people today, and they don't use the phone, right? And sometimes people will ask you, for example, hey, I can't connect to Wi-Fi, and they can't distinguish between Wi-Fi and 5G and cellular communications. For them, the whole cellular network thing doesn't make sense anymore. And in fact,
Yeah.
maybe it shouldn't in some way, some angles of things. So it changed how society thinks, not just how an individual thinks about phones and phone numbers and usage of it. It was part of a bigger picture of how society looks at the usefulness of that skill.
You mentioned the idea that we're delegating cognitive skills to machines, not just tasks. What's the risk in that? And I guess probably where do you draw the line between helpful and harmful delegation?
That is a great question. I don't think there's a catch-all answer to it, but the risks are abound. We have to remember this is a very, very young technology, which in normal situations would be considered a beta, right? But somehow it has been so disruptive that it has entered very large organizations very quickly without proper, I don't want to say security reviews, but without proper understanding of the risks. And this is particularly true for developers who have much, much more freedom using these technologies because they can use the APIs and connect these things more freely than most of us can. But that ability is also coming in very fast recently. Now, both Claude and ChatGPT have added abilities to connect your local app on the desktop to pretty much anything. And anybody can do it. And it's very difficult for IT teams to block that. They don't even understand what individuals can do. And so, as an individual, I can easily take information from that app, which may be connected to other tools, and funnel it into whatever I want on my desktop, connected to other stuff. I can mix and match. I can do things that, if I really wanted to, I could make a whole lot of a mess. Right? Now, ultimately, this would do one of two things. Either IT teams are going to crack down on these things and say, okay, we're going to block it unless Anthropic and OpenAI come in with better enterprise solutions and much more granular control over these things. And we're going to block all access to these tools altogether, or they're going to have to embrace a new level of autonomy on individual desktops and so on. So that's yet to be determined. Specifically addressing the risk, now we have risk associated with giving autonomy and decision making to these tools alongside action taking. So new agents and connecting them to different systems. So saying, hey, you decide for me and take action, right? So you write this document, you create a spreadsheet, you do the math, you log in and send the emails on my behalf or what have you, all of that. And assuming that it knows what it's doing, it's consistent and reliable. Neither are true. So ultimately, these tools are simply statistical guessing machines, right? That's all they are, is a guessing machine. They've gotten very good at guessing, but you throw the dice enough times and you're going to get all kinds of weird things. And so when you do things to scale, you're going to have a lot of weirdness happening just as an absolute number. Now, humans make mistakes too, but the assumption is that humans make mistakes. And somehow with these tools, people don't assume naturally that not only does it make mistakes, it's inconsistent, right? That could break stuff. And if you've worked with enough with these tools, you'll notice that, wait, why did it give it to me? Well, last time as a table and this time as a CSV, or last time it was formatted text, and now all of a sudden it's a markdown. Right? What's going on here? Right? Well, because it's statistics, right? It just guesses what you want.
But I think even more than that, it's also updating the platform in the back end as well. I mean, I had that same challenge this morning. It became quite frustrating in that there'd been a level of consistency in response on a particular item that I'm working on and I'm talking about over the course of the last 4 weeks. Then all of a sudden this morning, it's completely taken a different approach and a different format and a different style of answering. And I'm thinking that, this is continuing a conversation and a process with supposedly the same tool, but it's not the same tool. There's new models being released. There's being updates done in the background that are impacting the data that it's drawing on, the knowledge that it's drawing on, the way that it's responding, the language it's using, the formats it's using. The lack of consistency, I think, for me, is one of the single biggest frustrations. I understand everything needs to be checked and that, you need to be very aware and use your own brain for any of the responses that come out. But the lack of consistency, for me personally, is one of the biggest frustrations. It's a constant reminder that there's, this is far, far from enterprise grade. I mean, look at the example with Jason Lemkin of SaaStar. He was doing some work, and I won't mention the brand name of the company that he was using at the time, although I'm sure everybody knows it's been all over Twitter and LinkedIn. And the AI effectively deleted their entire database and then lied about it and then tried to cover up that they'd done it and then made I think it was the details are a little bit sketchy on me, but I think, then went to the extent of actually trying to make up some data to make it look like it hadn't. And in the end, it finally came clean. But, for a machine that does some guessing, at this stage, I wouldn't let it anywhere near my data. That's for sure. Not to have any control.
Yeah, I think there are different layers of defense we could put in there. So one is, do you connect it to your most holiest of holiest databases? your production database, or do you connect it to some kind of tertiary database that you built specifically for this workflow, or extracted just a table to give it what it needs and update that, have that go through some validation. We've seen that at Active Track as well, for example, where we've built a good.
I was just going to say, look, so I remember when we spoke last time, you built a system to separate AI for internal versus external. I'd love to hear if you can run us
Yeah, I
through
think there
that
are two
setup.
two examples to give here. One is when we built AI within our product, we did some kind of routine analysis of data and wanted to just give another dimension to the data using, in this case, Gemini API to analyze it and come to a conclusion and give that back to the customer, right? And this was a pretty straightforward AI assisted analysis or tagging, if you will, of data. So you needed to have AI do it because it knew how to do things like analyze one job title to another job title and say, actually, these are just different ways to say the same thing, right? And so it was
Mhm.
able to say, hey, these two things are really the same, something that a regular semantic search doesn't really know how to do. And so we did that, but the results were somewhat inconsistent, and it's obviously never perfect. So we put a separate layer of analysis on top of it, our own, and validation and sort of security on top of it. Is it, well, does it fit within? Is it purely X number of characters? Does it include any code in it or any kind of markup and all kinds of stuff like that before bringing it back into our database? And so you still need another layer to deal with the inconsistencies and all those stuff. The other example is we had a lot of concern internally about PII ending up in just regular cloud ChatGPT. We use all these tools, right? We have free access in the company. Our company is very AI friendly in the sense that we want our team to be highly productive and we give them the tools to be so. And we encourage people to experiment and to do more with it. So anybody who wants any of these tools can get them. And there was a lot of questions around, hey, what happens if an employee, if we give the tool access to through an MCP to different solutions or just integrations, say to calendar, and that has customer information in it, and a customer doesn't want their name publicly associated with us, could that make it through to, say, a press release or to something else? And the easy answer to that is, well, it's the responsibility of the user. When you think about it, the user doesn't know always what the source information is. For example, you could put a bunch of case studies in a cloud project or allow ChatGPT to search your documents. You don't know what it's picking up in there, right? And so the documents might contain even PII and things that are specifically not any human being would know. The customer wouldn't be happy if we included this piece of information about them. Even if we redacted their name, it might be obvious that it's them, right? And but the user doesn't necessarily know that Claude went into your Google Drive, picked up these different things, pieced them together, and now the information is there. And then just might assume I'm just writing an example in a support center article. And before you know it, things might become a little dicey. So those are the concerns. And there's no good answer for how to solve for that. There is no mechanism in place to put, say, a base prompt in Claude across the entire system, or ChatGPT, or anyone for that matter, that says, hey, whenever employees are asking you these type of questions for, say, writing a release note, make sure you don't mention any customer name ever and be a little aggressive on that side, right? There's no way to put that safeguard in there, right? And so what we decided to do was to get another solution, which we're piloting now, that would be designed purely for internal usage. So we would have one system of record for that will connect to everything, but employees know this is good only to create internal facing docs. And any external facing docs, you have to manually copy paste doc source material in there because that way you know what's going in. There is a line of sight for responsibility and accountability. You can't say, I didn't know, right? Or you can't get used to something. And that's the boundary we put in the system that to try and protect from these things. So same way as a user today can go into Salesforce or into any database that has information about our customers, theoretically pull it out, copy it, paste it into any tool, right? Or into Canva for that matter, right? And post it. Same thing applies here. They would know not to do that, right? They would simply know. And that's the safeguard we put in place.
The human in the loop.
I posted on LinkedIn a while back and said I made a fun of the incredibly shrinking company about how companies are shrinking and shrinking. Eventually, there'll only be one person left. And somebody made a shrewd remark on that and said, well, if there's only one person left, who will they fire when things go wrong?
Who will pilot these girls?
It is sort of a funny remark, but it's true. That's something we always need humans in the loop for, to make sure that they are the ones accountable and responsible. And we have to make sure that the workflows go through them and that they know that they are responsible.
How much of a risk do you think there is in, a simple human error? One of the team members is extraordinarily busy. They need an external document or some external information. They ask the internal system for that information and then send it out. Even if there's no PII or concerning data, do you think the likelihood is that could happen?
And just same as any likelihood of any human making a mistake, doing that with any system, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
these things, that's why company culture and habits are so important. And all these different policies and routines evolved over time, and we have a collective knowledge of how these things work. And that's why we don't need such highly prescriptive guidance for people. Like, okay, before you click on a link in an email, you must follow these 5 steps. We just tell people, look, be careful with email links, right? And people know. And the same thing here. It just took a long time for people to learn those, and how many mistakes have people made over time with emails and still make, right? People still click on phishing emails. And we have some processes in place and we have some tools in place. But at the end of the day, you can't restrict email altogether, and you can't, it's too burdensome to put in a whole process of you must check these 4 boxes before clicking on a link in an email. We've come to some kind of equilibrium of risk reward on these things, and the same thing will happen here over time. We must embrace these tools, or we will shrivel and die compared to competitors who will be able to simply generate higher profit margins, because this is what I call in the book the AI augmented employee versus the non-AI augmented, right? The AI augmented people will be able to produce 2, 3, 4, sometimes 10 times the amount of work of somebody who's non-augmented. I see this for myself in my role and in my team. We are 3 people in my team. And we have more responsibilities than a team of 5 that was a while before I joined, who did a lot less, and we turned things around much faster. Now, I'm not saying we're perfect. We're not by any means, but there's never ending work. But my point is, we are augmented and we do better, and we're going to be more augmented, and we're going to do even better, right? And if competitor have an entire team which is unaugmented, it's just going to cost them more to do this less than what we do. So we will win.
Correct,
Right.
correct. You made a comment that the risk is the same as it's always been with any tool. We've got those protocols and processes in the business. We don't need to be so prescriptive and so directive and give such in-depth instructions to our people to know that they'll get it right. It's funny, the juxtaposition. That's exactly what we do need to do to give to AI is such descriptive descriptions and guardrails, and be so directive to try and get it to be right.
Correct. And one of the reasons that is the case is because this dives into a slightly different topic. AI is incredibly effective when you have clarity of thought about the task you wanted to complete for you. If you know how it needs to get done, if you know what exactly you want to get done, AI is an incredibly effective tool. It can get so much done for you. As part of writing the book, I was using AI extensively, and I've seen this incredibly powerful. This is an incredibly powerful story in this sense, because writing a book is so difficult. It's a ton of work. And if you just ask AI, can you write a book? It can't. It just can't. It doesn't know how. All these commonly used AI tools, they cannot write a book. But if you understand how a book is written, if you have a clarity of thought about what you want in the book, and you're able to break it down for very clear tasks for the tool to do, it'll do it beautifully for you, and it'll be an extension of your brain in a way. It's magical. I want to write a chapter, and I have very clear idea in my head what a chapter needs to be about and how it needs to be structured and what needs to be written. I can tell AI, and it'll create exactly what I pictured in my brain because I have the clarity of thought. In those chapters where I was like, well, I need to write about this. I know I need to cover this topic now, but yeah, this is not my thing. Could you just write this chapter for me? Here's some random thoughts. It goes south very quickly, right? It'll just, because it cannot guess what you want if you don't know what you want. And so this point of being able to give it very clear instructions is so true. And it highlights the need for our new skill that's associated with clear communications and clear understanding of the process and clear understanding of the subject matter and how things are done. Only then can you utilize AI well for your business and utilize it, and not just effectively, but at a professional level that meets or beats the competition. If you just use AI to say, hey, do this for me, it'll default to the lowest common denominator of feedback it has got.
And it will aim to please. I
Yeah.
found I had a breakthrough about 6 weeks ago. I put a prompt into the customization on ChatGPT that made it change the way that it interacted with me. And I found that it's forced me in the communications I've had and the tasks I've given it to make me think much deeper and challenge my assumptions. And so that by the time I finished interacting with it to pass the information on, I've almost solved the problem myself. And it was of groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking. It's a pretty simple prompt, but in that customization component that really forced me to dig deep and ask the questions of myself, it asked the questions of me before it would give a response, because I found it was becoming a pleaser. It was becoming this thing that was giving me almost the answers that I was looking for. It was not offering that there might be a better way to do this. It's not offering alternatives. It was becoming beige and beige the more I was using it. And that's when I started to search and find and think about a way that could actually stop it from doing that, give it a jolt and make sure that it's digging down and considering all of the alternatives. And a lot of that was to do with my prompting was becoming probably less detailed than it should have been. And this is a way I've found to solve that, is to make it ensure that I'm covering every single aspect in the prompting by asking me the questions and challenging and provoking my thoughts. And it's been a game changer, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing here is the basically including in your prompt a sentence similar to this. Make Complete this task one step at a time and make sure to ask me one question at a time, and until you have everything you need to proceed successfully.
No, no, it's actually much deeper than that. I'll pull it up and give the example while we're chatting here. Excuse me. In the customization,
Oh, the customization of the platform, that is brilliant. Yes.
yeah, in the customization. So what I've done here is went and built quite a detailed instruction that says, challenge my thinking. From now on, don't validate my ideas by default. Point out weak logic, lazy assumption, chamber thinking. When I present an idea, ask 3 follow-up questions that go deeper than surface level. Push me to clarify, specify, and refine what I mean. Play devil's advocate for anything I say that what would a smart person who disagrees with me argue? Force me to defend my positions clearly. Detect vagueness. If I'm being vague, generic, or overly abstract, pause me. Ask me for specific examples or concrete definitions until we're sharp. And seek truth, not comfort. Your job isn't to make me feel good. It's to help me think better. If I'm wrong, tell me clearly and explain why. No fluff. And it has just completely changed the conversations that I've been
This is
having.
brilliant. Just baking that, and you articulated it absolutely perfectly into the system settings, or into what we call the base prompt sometimes. That is
Yep.
fantastic. And into the instructions. Of course, you could also do different instructions in different projects or different GPTs or what have you. to behave differently based on your needs. Sometimes you want it to validate you or to be exactly as I'm telling you right now, or brainstorm and play along with me, right? So you could build different sets of
Of
instructions like
course.
that for the
Yeah, yeah.
needs. Or this is
Yeah, we do. And I've got a lot of different custom GPTs I use for a whole lot of different purposes. And, I've only put this in as the base argument. And I'm finding with the other custom GPTs, this isn't necessarily flowing through to all of them either. It's very, very strange. I expected that it would to a certain extent, but it doesn't seem to have done that. The custom GPTs are sticking with the instructions that they've been given.
And I like the fact that you did something really smart, which I think a very small number of prompts out there include, or users out there do often, which is prove me wrong. So it's very easy to ask something and validate it. So, for example, if you asked, hey, I have the following symptoms, could this be that I have cancer? And it
Yeah,
might
yeah.
say, well, it
Could
could
be.
be, yes, you know, but then if you say, "Hey, I have the following, could these symptoms is it likely prove that it's unlikely these symptoms are associated with cancer?" It might say, "There's overwhelming evidence that this is associated
Correct.
with cancer," right? And so
Correct.
oftentimes this is, the hypochondriac extreme, these tools, because whatever you think you might have, it'll say, "Yeah, there's a possibility that is the case." And if you're not careful with that, you will, depends on your role, depends on what you need out of the system, you might end up in an echo chamber, right?
Well, it was fascinating because as I thought through this process and what was going on, I realized it was becoming like, just as you've described then, it was becoming a yes man.
Yeah.
It was becoming, a confirmer as opposed to a challenger. And through my entire career, I've had very little time for yes people. You want to be challenged. You're never the smartest in the room. You're there to hear the ideas and let people put things forward. And that's been my style. And I think it was only as I was reflecting what's the real worth of this tool, is it really bringing me value, that I realized that I thought about it. I heard the comment that you should consider in all instructions and actions and questions that you're asking LLMs at the moment, that they are as good as your newest intern.
Yes. And treat them as an intern. Basically, don't put too many steps into any prompt. Do things step by step and make sure you take a look at the steps. In other words, you wouldn't tell an intern, design and build the product for me. You would say, first of all, come up with a pitch why you want it. You have a million different steps, and you'd say, show it to me before you proceed, please. You need to do the exact same thing here, because if you want to debug it or to fix it, you want to catch any drift from your intent early on. And then you're
Really, yeah.
constantly course correcting it. And at the end, you'll end up with a very, very strong output. But if you tend to do all these things at once, well, a small error along in each step is going to add up to a very large error at the end. Just like a spaceship that veers 0.1% off its course will miss the moon, right? It'll end up in some other
Yeah.
planet or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. So, what are some cognitive red lines you think businesses should never delegate to AI?
I don't know if never is a word we want to use here, because I don't know in 20, 100 years when we're going to want, but today, I could say,
Today, yeah.
well, first of all, judgment, right? Any judgment needs to be done by the user until we have until we have validated consistently over time, hey, this works. I'm very comfortable and confident with this. Is what I keep coming back to. The sales team, for example, I'll give a very clear example on this. We have a project in Claude that creates perfectly personalized and contextualized emails per individuals, either through LinkedIn information, account information, product information. So we just dump in a bunch of stuff, and it has a bunch of instructions in there. So it'll look at their industry, it'll look at different things and say, hey, in your industry, we have this and this. And it maps out the use cases, and it just perfectly tells them what they need, what they want to hear in relevance to our product. Never lies. It's absolutely beautiful. And yet they have to copy paste in and out. And they say, can't we just connect this into Outreach and just do it there? Or can't we just, because the Outreach templates are, those templates. And they're flagged by, if you've got Mimecast, it'll clean out any kind of template-based stuff or anything that resembles that. It'll like toss it right out. People will never see it. And yet it still registers as red, which is beautiful. Back to our topic. So they'll come back to me and say, I love this. The emails are fantastic. The LinkedIn messages are fantastic. These work really well. Can we automate this? And I'm saying, come back to me in a month and say it's worked well most of the time, if not all the time. This is the only problem I have is copy pasting in and out all day. I don't want to do that. When you tell me that, I'm going to go to the dev team and say, okay, take this exact system we have and just streamline it and integrate it. Until you tell me that all you're doing is copy pasting and not editing, I'm not going to do that. I want to see consistent results because they're still changing stuff. They're still tweaking it and running again and again, but they don't even notice they're doing it. And because it's so easy to do, right? And so that judgment has to fall with the human, and they have to be in charge of the quality of the output.
So it's really interesting for me that the questions like that and requests and even individuals in business will push integrations through without necessarily thinking about it. You talked about the illusion of safety with integrations. The example you're giving now, why do you think people overlook the risks?
Because the promise is so great, because it saves so much time, it's so capable, and because it seems magical compared to anything we've had in the past. It does feel magical. I mean, it really does things that we only dreamt of just a few years ago. I mean, this technology came out, 2, 3 years ago? Just unbelievable. 3 years ago, I think. That's it. And it's so new, and we're just rushing. And the other thing is, the hype in the market around it is not for nothing. Companies that are adopting it and moving fast with it are gaining advantage over the competition and gaining and the stock prices is going up. I've seen this firsthand. We work with many call centers and different workforce-based organizations. And we've seen some deploy AI, and we measure the impact of AI. So we know exactly how much the benefits are. And so what we've seen is sometimes they will deploy AI and reduce the cost of call centers by 50%, right? That is enormous. And when you see our competitors doing that, you have to do it. Now, this tidal wave is heading our way in every single role in the company. Maybe not all roles are as clearly impactful or understood how this will impact them today as it does with call centers, for example. And developers are clearly at risk of that, but also product managers. We were looking at this yesterday and thinking, hey, does one even need nowadays to have PLDs and Figma files? And the answer is no, you don't need to use Figma. The fact that Figma went out to market with a valuation of 3 billion is incredible, thinking that new technologies completely bypass the need for Figma. Reason why it hasn't, that people are still using Figma is simply because they're working through old human processes and they haven't adapted the organizational structure to eliminate the need for this tool. But you can go directly to prototype today and then have the AI just adapt it to your brand guidelines or to your UI guidelines or what have you, right there and then. You don't need to go through this really tiresome and slow process of, okay, let's create these 2D flat presentations that, are just mock-ups and then have to go through all these iterations and stuff. It could be done dramatically differently and a lot faster. Few startups know how to do this. And once that becomes well understood how it's done, it's going to hit us all, right? And,
Well, it'll certainly hit Figma shareholders.
well, yeah, or Figma will adapt and figure out, and I'm sure they're thinking about all these stuff internally, day in and day out, and they have a lot of money, and so they're gonna put money towards the problem. And I'm not predicting what'll happen to Figma's share price. I'm just pointing out an interesting fact in the market today, right? Well, it might acquire a bunch of companies or what have you. And so this will affect us all. And I think we all have the understanding that it will affect us all. And we're seeing top to bottom mandates at this point to introduce AI into the business, to explore it and understand potentials and stop there. This is from most businesses.
And stop
Stop
there, did you
there,
say?
right? Like, do we actually have a plan? Do we actually have fixed goals to say, hey, let's reduce the entire workforce by 10, 20% across all teams and departments? Let's cut back the entire development team and produce more. No, right? But it will come soon. So the first stage is let's just explore this. Second stage is come back to me. Now that you have the tools, come back to me with how are you going to how are you going to implement this and actually reduce costs by X number of percent? And how will you cut time to market on features and products or lower your inventory? All these things, right? That's going to stop as
I-
competitors achieve it.
If that's what most businesses are doing, as someone that's leading AI transformation inside your business, what are the real wins that you've seen?
Inside our business? That's a great question. I think we've seen the first win was it took a year to really go beyond the early adopters. I think it was surprisingly challenging to get people to use it in their roles, even though it was obvious what the benefits are. Yeah,
Interesting.
this took me by surprise. And I'm not going to mention the specific teams, et cetera, to protect the dignity and
But
privacy.
if I can say though, if you think about it, it's not dissimilar to any market. You've got your early adopters, your fast followers, then you've got the mass, then you've got your laggards, etc. So that's a personality driven, not necessarily driven by any type of other type of resistance.
Correct. And now we're at a point where there's some people who are adapting and learning and excited about, hey, what can I do more and more and more? And are actively looking to learn. And that is fantastic. And there are some people who say, all I do all day is just take people's requests and feed it to AI and then look at the response and send it back. And that is a very good place to be. Meaning, okay, you are now at a point where you're far more useful than before because you're delegating a lot to AI. You've mastered that. Now you're questioning, okay, what is your purpose? So let's talk about advancing you, right? Not
Mm.
just your interaction with AI. Let's advance you and give you and see what more you can do and where we can take you. And that is really great to see. So I think on a human level, I'm seeing that as the first win. We've seen a massive aha moment several months ago or late last year, where it's like, okay, we have seen how this can affect our company. We have an amorphous, vague idea of potential, but we don't have a plan. So for 2025, let's just make sure everybody does this. And now for 2026, we have goals, specific goals to really introduce AI into everything. And in fact, we have a hackathon coming up soon where it's like, okay, how can we advance leapfrog the product forward with AI? Not just like, hey, let's add some AI, but how do we really leapfrog the capabilities forward to make dramatic change, not just incremental change? And so I think those are kind of from a process or from an organizational adoption, organizational change perspective. I think that's kind of the steps we have been going through. But like you said, it's been a bottom up approach. Let's get a lot of people to use it with a blessing from above. Okay, great. It trickled upward that now up above, they understand and they accept that this is potentially big without the complete clarity of what it can do. So the instruction has
Yeah.
come back to now we want you looking down at you. Give us the clarity. You had enough time to play with it. Give us the clarity back to us so we can tell you, you got to do this. That's happening for the rest of the year. And in 2026, we're going to see very clear guidance with very clear projects that in our case, because we're in growth mode, not in cost cutting mode, we will focus more on, hey, how can we expand? How can we grow? How can we get more leads? How can we enhance the product and capabilities and reach and new market and create new markets, maybe new products? and how can we grow our GRR and ARR and all those metrics and retention rather than, hey, how can we cut costs? I think we're always looking at efficiency, but we're not looking to cut costs in order to cut costs. We're looking to grow efficiency. And so that is always secondary in our mind. But for some companies right now, they're in cost cutting mode and they're going to take the same approach, but look at in 2026, apply how can we dramatically cut our costs so we can increase our profit margins compared to the competition.
It's really interesting. You're in this environment at the moment. We spoke about using GPT more responsibly in terms of asking it to prove us wrong instead of validating ideas. How else do you train your teams at the moment when they're going through this process to think critically around AI?
It's a good question. I like to show them as we're working on different use cases. So I work with team a lot on specific use cases, and this would be in one-on-one coaching or group coaching. And I'll kind of show them and do a lot of kind of live examples with them and sort of walk through an example and say, okay, here, let's try this now. And it would spit out whatever. And I say, look, this is what happens, right? So I do a lot of that kind of stuff. I will point out things like, you got to be careful here, or you got to think about what you want and and always give it instructions around what is the desired output. Know what you wanted to give you before you tell it what to do, right? Those kind of stuff. And I don't think we have a formal process in place. It just is development of this awareness. I think it's tricky because for some, you'll find people I think the early adopters jumped in right away without much caution and just run with it. Well, with the people I'm working with today are the ones that are cautious or overly cautious. And those are the ones I need to nudge to actually get over it. and like, worst case, you're going to look at it, you're not going to like it, and you throw it in the trash, right? And you do it again. And I think that's more, so it's interesting that these days I'm less concerned about that. Plus the IT team is getting a lot more concerned because just increased awareness. So they're playing that role and they're the ones driving me crazy now in a positive way. Like, hey, what about this? What about that? And the other one's playing the devil advocate. So for me personally, it's not as much of a concern these days.
That's a very interesting point, though, for businesses in terms of where they are on, their level of implementation or journey with AI. Those early adopters, where you are now, there's a level of criticality built into the business effectively because you have those people that are more resistant and reluctant. So they're much more mindful of the potential impacts. But for the early adopters in those early stages, that's where things can go really wrong. And I know I've used this example already, but obviously Jason Lemkin from SaaStr is an early adopter with what he was doing. And I think you used the comment last time, the most dangerous person in the organization is the CEO. They can do whatever they want. And you saw the ramifications of that. But it's the early adopters that really need to have that level of awareness and guardrails in terms of making sure that they don't take that step that is just a step too far that opens the organization to disaster.
Yeah. And that's where, the question of what is the potential maximum damage you can make come into play. If you are a CSM using this to prepare customer reports, the maximum damage you can do is an individual customer or series of customers because you might not, but it's limited to that. You don't have access to the database. You don't have access to production. And even if nowadays anyone who has Claude on their device can have Claude install stuff on their device, write code, build software, do all kinds of stuff, right? You might do stuff to your device that'll mess things up, right? Okay, worst case, that device has to go back and you have to get a replacement device. There's some damage there and you might have lost some downloaded data, but there are recovery methods for that. Could you build a computer virus? I haven't tried it, but that would be malicious work, right? I don't think anybody would create it by mistake. No. And so I think you have to kind of know what is the extent of the damage you're capable of and be aware of it. And then at the same time, I think organizations should have people experiment with it because the real breakthrough here is not in the small increments. The 99% of people who use AI use it to hey, clean up my email, write a blog post, take what I've written and refactor it. That's what most people use it for. A lot of people on a personal level will use it for generating ideas from the web. That's not really interesting in the sense that it really, again, it defaults back to the lowest common denominator from the market. You'd want to do deep research, give it very clear instructions, upload some documents and say, okay, now study this. And within a certain framework, give me, here are my thoughts and balance off of that or take them further, right? But just asking a general question like, what is the easier, how would one write an outbound email? Back to that example, because it's so common, it's not interesting for an organization. That's very minor incremental improvements in productivity. The big, enormous shifts and leap forwards in productivity are things like how do we eliminate Figma altogether? How do we eliminate the need to go through multiple review cycles internally? How do we eliminate the need to wait a week until we go to that next meeting where everybody reports back and says, yes, this is ready for shipping. And in fact, it was ready on Monday, but we had to wait till Friday meeting to hear that from you because that's how we work. The big leap forward is you don't have to wait. The system knows that you told somebody else in the organization it's ready, and I don't have to wait till I meet with you on Friday for you to tell me. I will just know right away because the AI knows, therefore I know. And those things can only change because people experiment, because people get creative, because people dare. And they dare to change something and they dare to do things not the way we've always done them. And they dare to propose something.
You spoke before about the putting an integration in place, which is effectively, the next level of automation for the messaging in outreach for the sales team. For me, that's almost the framework you spoke about then in terms of when is it worth automating versus, when does it still need human judgment? It's like when you've seen consistent output that you haven't need to alter, you said for a month. Do you have a particular framework in mind that you use to judge whether something is worthwhile automating or whether it still needs human judgment?
Yeah, I think the automation falls into a few categories, and there's no difference here between this and classic automation. The question is, how much money is it costing the business? How much will it cost me to deliver this? What's different here, what's missing here is that the cost to deliver it is a lot lower potentially than it has ever been because we don't have to go and buy a product for it. We don't have to get external people. And we have internal resources that can do it. The challenge that we see today is it's not clear who are the internal resources, or we don't have dedicated ops teams that know how to do this well in most organizations. So I think next year we're going to start seeing ops teams or IT teams dedicated to internal AI solution building. And we see some of those today, but they're very few and far between. We're going to see this evolve into a real team that's standard in most organizations, even small ones. And all they will do is look around and somebody will say, hey, can I have this workflow I want to build? Can you build it for me? And it'll be almost as easy as building a BI report. The way the ops teams, you fill out the form, the next week you get a BI report saying, here's what you asked for, right? It'll be the same. They'll go through some kind of review process. They'll build a prototype. They'll say, hey, does this work for you? Say, this is great. It's a little more than that. Somebody has to maintain these things. Somebody knows how to troubleshoot it when it breaks, all these stuff. That's why we need a dedicated team that has the proper access, that can be accountable for these things and maintaining them and keeps track of all of these different AI workflows. But this process optimization industry that in the past cost millions and we had to bring people in from the outside is going to come in-house. It's going to be very cheap. And we're going to see a lot more of it happen internally. You'll just have to make case for it and say, and it'll be prioritized based on ROI, as simple as that, right? Some stuff are going to be so simple and so easy. It'll just be, somebody could just do it in 5 minutes because all it takes is just, I need a prompt. Can you just make that happen? Just connect these two things with the
Yeah,
prompts, right?
yeah, yeah. Look, there's a lot of conversation around governance. You've given some examples of practical examples at a lower level where that you've put some things in place. But what does good AI governance actually look like inside an organization from an organizational level?
I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that question. And I don't think anybody knows. I don't think there's a good template or playbook for that yet. I think people know, but they don't have. There's nothing is really being fully baked, partly because this thing is changing so quickly. And and partly because, like I said, we want to let people dare, right? And so that's where the potential lies. And so how do you balance those? So governance, I can't speak so much. I'm not an expert in governance and bureaucracy and legal and management of that type. What I can say is that having somebody in the organization that understands these systems and can advocate for them and understands their potential and their risk and understands how they work is really, really important. Because if you just ask your average CIO or IT team, they'll have so many questions. There'll be, or even CTO will overthink it, right? They'll have so many questions that it'll become analysis paralysis. They can't move forward. But if you have an evangelist, the chief AI officer type, it's accountable, understands it, and says, look, this is worthwhile pushing forward. It's worthwhile taking these type of risks. I think that will help a lot. And then the governance question is the function of that. And they would know how to do that, to manage that in the organization and work with the various stakeholders to really set it up right for your organization.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. I think the big point is having the expertise within the business to understand both the opportunities and the potential pitfalls. You shared a story last time we were talking about somebody blindly trusting AI to fill out a regulatory form. That approval happened and there was some to and fro, but it raises a bigger question for me. What happens when AI gets it wrong and nobody's watching? What's your take on where oversight needs to sit in?
Well, the question, of course, is who set it up? I think it's very similar to self-driving cars. What happens when a car drives by itself and nobody was sitting in the driver's wheel, right? And there was an accident. So if there's no accident, nothing happened, right? The answer is nothing, right? And everything is good. When something does go wrong, who is to blame, right? Who set this up? Who's responsible? The answer is, well, if either the driver or the car owner, right? And if there's no driver there, then it's whoever owned that car and had it and hit the stop button or whatever that was. So I think the same thing goes in an organization. It's like if you're just gonna create stuff and let them run, we do this all the time. People, I knew somebody who worked had a business, and the entire model was, we will go into your business, find all those servers and computers that are running and they don't actually do anything for your business. We'll shut them down one by one and we'll save you millions. You can't imagine how many servers are running in your business on different computers that do nothing for your business. They're like, yeah, we know, but we don't know how to find them and we don't want to take the risk. So we'll do that for you. Right. And they go in and now there's a lot more is cloud based and you can do the same for cloud, right? There's so many different servers running. It turns out you don't need them in the first place, so they could be a lot more efficiently run. And so the same question happens, right? Who set it up? Who just left it there? Why didn't you maintain it? Who's responsible? And that's why I think the concept of an internal AI ops team, and that could be a team of one, it could be a larger team, is so important. They'll be able to not only be accountable, they will be able to move stuff along, to learn, to set up a framework. And set up perhaps layers of protection. So when we first came out with our AI integration solution, so Active Track measures employee activity and devices, right? We do this at a very meta level. So we don't read emails, we don't watch cameras. We just kind of want to know where is productive work happening when, so businesses can make better decisions. And we collect all that information. And we provide different interfaces and user interfaces and reporting tools. But we also have an API. And we were able to make that AI ready. And we have a whole solution for businesses that want to connect that to their AI systems so they can analyze it in multiple new ways. And one of the first things that I knew we would need would be, hey, we need a layer between us and their AI that is able to take all the business logic and all of the security and privacy and compliance requirements, all of these things, and put that in some place to put all of that in a place that can be looked at. A human would be able to log in and say, yes, I reviewed all of these and I can add to this as we learn lessons, or I can release a bit as it becomes less relevant, or hold on a second, in Europe, we need to do a little more of this and that. If somebody is accessing the data from Europe, make sure of that, right? And so just being able to add that in. And I think whenever you have an internal team, they're able to either informally or very formally take that layer and either bake it into whatever they do, or literally create a layer where they take those requirements and write it down into their workflow, right? And I think that's why it's so crucial that this will start happening soon, because the question of who's responsible is going to start showing up more and more.
And so that to that point, there always needs to be, from what you're saying there can never really be a time when nobody's watching, whether it's directly or through policy and process. There has to be someone involved at some point in time.
Correct.
Hey, you know, you said something very powerful at the beginning of this conversation, and I actually made a note, I didn't skip over it. You said that AI is starting to shape new religions and political systems, even how we define truth. Where do you see this going in the next 3 to 5 years?
That is a chapter I just started writing. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, that's really interesting. I think one thing that I'll give here is that in a fractured world, in a world where we have infinite personal realities, right? The way I see the world and the information I get about the world is different than yours. People are very uncomfortable with that. This kind of uncertainty and truth that is an uncertainty in who and what to trust is not a place society likes to have or tolerates for a long time. In other words,
So, but that's not dissimilar to before AI, though, is it? I mean, depending on which news channel you watch, we see different perspectives of the world. My personality and personal experiences over my life will give me a different viewpoint. We can both be looking at exactly the same or event that may have happened on a world stage, and we will see it and experience it in different ways. How is
the
AI?
fragment of reality has already happened, and we're seeing a lot. We're seeing the consequences of that starting to already emerging. What AI adds to that is a much deeper lack of trust in any authority. Meaning, if you can't believe a video, an image, a sound recording, you can't tell truth from fiction anymore. And you can be validated pretty much of anything you want to be validated. Right? You can find proof for anything because you simply tweak the prompt to get it. The insecurity and the lack of trust in authority is getting worse.
And so it's like the search engine algorithms on steroids. You know, you search for something and it gives you more and more of what you're looking for, which is validation
Correct.
and of your particular circum or position. Then with AI, it's doing that to an even greater level because it's a two-way conversation.
Correct. And so in a situation when reality is uncertain, when you have lack of trust in authority and organizations, and there's a lot of data to show that lack of trust in political parties, in the court system, in doctors, in education. There's so much showing it, students today, they trust AI as better teachers than they trust their teachers. And people will trust AI more than they trust their doctors. This is incredible data that's coming up, and it's changing very fast in the last couple of years. And so society cannot function like this for a long period of time. It does not like it. So you're seeing a few models emerging, and some closer than others. You can see the Chinese and Russian models, two different models. Chinese authoritative model where it's, okay, we will create one reality that everyone must adhere to, and we will control your thoughts almost to that level. the Russian model, which is, hey, let's embrace this and take advantage of this and make everything seem fake to the level of nihilism of it doesn't even matter anymore. I just give up. I'll just let the government do whatever it does and that's it. And I just resign from reality altogether. Or in the Western world, we have more free markets and free choice and things. So we will have people choosing which solution they want. Some will choose religious authority as an ultimate source of truth and reliability and confidence. Some will choose charismatic political leaders, maybe an emerging ideology or two. And some of those are already shaping up or evolving. And some will turn to AI as an authoritative truth because it's data driven, it's not human, it's all these things that in some ways we dreamed of, and in some ways we treat AI as a deity, so not just a sort of a social authority. So I'm not saying AI is going to be a new God, but there is a phenomena of dataism. There is a phenomena where people are slowly delegating more to AI and accepting its authority over them and abdicating a lot of their decision making to AI subconsciously at this point.
You know, I it's so perplexing to me in I agree with what you're saying in terms of people, I won't say that it's a fate or a deity, but they believe what's happening and what AI is confirming. And yet then you see there seems to be this naivety. Do they not think that I think society is forgetting the fact that these large, these LLMs, these organizations that are building these huge engines, they have a perspective. They have, whether it's a commercial reality, there is an objective that they have. And so look at yesterday's, I think for me, that really crystallized yesterday when there was an announcement that Sam Altman from OpenAI and Mark Zuckerberg from Meta actually stated their objectives of their AI platforms and development. And Sam Altman came out and said, the whole objective of OpenAI is to replace humans. And Zuckerberg came out and said the whole objective of Meta's AI is to amplify humans. And just that thought process, that's the underlying objective of these two platforms, is so different that anyone that is engaging with one or the other is going to have such a different reality that they're living in, that where does the balance come from? How does someone, if they don't have that level of awareness of what's driving this from a top level, they don't have the exposure across different platforms to have the different perspectives. What is the outcome? How do you say society doesn't like it when won't live there, but what's the next step? Where's the change coming? What
The change is never comfortable. So when you look at previous disruptions of this type, they have led to revolutions, and not necessarily a violent revolution, but they've led to revolutions where a whole shift in the balance of power and in social structures, religious changes. And the classic example is the Protestant Revolution, right? The Reformation. It was a revolution. Monks lost their place in society and their power. The Catholic Church lost a lot of territory and coverage. So it's very hard to say exactly what happened. But what we do know is that inevitably some change must happen because we're already seeing it take place. We're seeing a whole new class, in more than one class emerge. The whole gig economy class didn't exist before. We're seeing a class of the tech billionaires or the tech, like I said, the Zuckerbergs and Musks of the world that have not only now technological power, now they have a lot of political power. And what they decide doesn't just control what our phone can do, it controls our realities, right? And they now have political interests above and beyond just, hey, change the regulations to benefit my company. They're intertwined with media and trade and many, many different social policies that are directly tied to the kind of work that they do. If robots are going to replace humans at Tesla, that's what they want. Or if, they will, this is intertwined with policies, right? And Uber don't want to pay, they don't want their gig workers to be employees because they see themselves as a network platform, not as a software platform that just coordinates and moves information around. They don't see themselves as a cab company at all, right? All
It's,
these
yeah.
things are intertwined now. And so that is a class in and of itself. And of course, there's the influencer class, and those include religious influencers, political influencers, and people that are they don't come from the traditional background of authority through education and through the typical process of they went to university or they have religious influence because they're priests. They have religious influence because they're charismatic and they can gain a much bigger following and have a much bigger influence and make a lot more money than a cult member, right? So, or any megachurch for that effect. So these are shifts that are happening today already in the structures of power. And we're seeing some of those things play out in politics today. A lot of the policies that are being debated, a lot of the fast, rapid shifts back and forth in the reactionary approach today to politics is a direct outcome from these changes. It's not just a something that happens, right? All of these things are an outcome of these factual realities. Immigration policy, medical policy that we see today are outcomes that are driven by information in social media and social networks. And now AI is turbocharging that. And so when you see people relying on trusting AI more than they trust doctors, well, when you have people in the government that are not doctors making very concrete statement opinions and policies based off of that are aligned with those with what people hear in social media or AI is telling them, well, they are much more okay with it, right? And I'd argue these policies are designed to mimic. They're not random. They're not people's whims. They are not people's ideologies. They are directly mirroring different trends on social media, which are directly feeding into AI training. So there's a loop going on here between all these things. And some are being manipulated, but mostly it's, like you said, it's the biases from within the system, for good or bad. There are always biases, no matter. There's no system it can be completely neutral because being neutral is biased in its own way, right? Those studies that show that angry content gets, I think, 10 times more circulation and more reaction online than content that evokes any other emotion, right? Angry content is associated more with right-wing content because that's just how things work, right? And so by definition, these platforms being neutral promote more right-wing content. And it's just not a political statement or anything like that. It's just an observation of how mechanics of things work. And so the question of biases in the system will always be there, right? And so some will argue, well, to fix that, we need to create biases. And some will simply be cynical and take advantage of biases. And you can see the model of, say, Turkey and, strongman approach. Let's bend reality around us and bend policies around us to meet our specific needs and take an opportunistic advantage of whatever trend happens here, sort of, South America style politics. Right.
I've just listened to everything you said, and you prefaced at the beginning, and you've said it a couple of times that you don't necessarily think that, that we're approaching a new reformation, but I'm getting the sense that I think you do. And of all the people I've spoken to, I get a sense that you've, to a much deeper level, given it much more thought, certainly than anybody I've spoken to before. Now, the Reformation, not necessarily of religion, but of power and truth, which is exactly what you've just described we're currently going through now. What do you think that might look like in our lifetime? What do you think the future that this represents or that will present for us?
I think we're going to see a lot more uncertainty before we start seeing certainty. And I think we're in a very unique and unprecedented period in history because never before have we seen two and possibly three major communication, actually technological slash communication disruptions of this magnitude happen so close together that the repercussions of one haven't been completed before the next one started. And so the digital revolution we've all seen and known with the social media communication, all that. And even that hasn't completed yet as we've gone through COVID and everything. That's still evolving. And we've had the great deplatforming, for example. That's very recent that many of the alt-right movements and the far-right movements have moved off the mainstream platforms into their own platforms. And that's Gab and Truth Social, etc. And what are the repercussions of that? That even hasn't set yet. So this is still new, even if you're saying, yeah, that isn't that already the truth, already the situation? Well, it's still evolving and happening, right? And society hasn't adjusted, government systems haven't adjusted. And if you look at what happened to the Democratic Party in the US, that is all that collapse of that party today. They have no clue how to get out of that situation they're in right now. That is directly correlated with them not knowing how to deal with these new types of communications. It is not their platform. It is their inability to work in real time against these new types of communications. And you just can't handle it. They need to figure it out. And it so happened that the Republican Party was able to embrace these things a lot faster and a lot better. So that's still okay. Now we're having AI just starting, right? And it's moving so fast. And in 2, 3 years, we're going to start seeing the robotics revolution come in. And that's going to be mind boggling because that's going to affect class in a way that we haven't seen before. Because everybody that has been affected by globalization and offshoring of jobs, so we're talking about industrial work, et cetera, that now are being promised by right-wing conservative movements will bring back the glory of the old days before globalization and bring back old industrial work to the US. And this was echoed across the world, similar claims, right? Whether that is a good idea or not, whether that will succeed or not, before we will even know, robotics are going to disrupt that very same population disproportionately more than anyone else. These are
Mm.
if we bring back factory workers to the US and we have more expensive labor, well, what is going to happen? There's going to be a much stronger incentive to build them off of robotics than before. So it's going to accelerate that movement and the impact on society and the impact and the disillusionment, once again, is going to be even stronger. And so history tells us that in such periods of change, with one disruption, you go through different cycles of could be violent, could be nonviolent, could very, let's say, uncomfortable shifts in power and evolution of political and religious thinking. Now we're talking about three of them. So I do not dare to say exactly what will happen. Will we see new religions come out? I think it's way too early to know exactly what will happen. I think religion will adapt and change, and we might see some emerge. They may or may not succeed. But I wouldn't venture to guess what is the ultimate outcome, but I will say we're going to see a lot more discomfort, social discomfort, and it's going to lead to a lot more very charismatic figures saying, I've got the answer. We've got to put a foot down and create one social order that'll put an end to this discomfort. We haven't seen as much of that from the left as we have from the right, but it will come. It must come. And when you have two opposing such charismatic figures duking it out in public with a big following that nowadays you can bring out into the street a lot more easily and rapidly than before. The cycles around that, the ability to mobilize is unlike anything we've seen in the past. We're going to see more of that, right? Which will enhance the cycle of the demand for a one true social order, right? So that is the worst case scenario, is that actually happens, that takes place, and we end up like China. The the better scenario, which I'm optimistic about, and I think is more indicative of the Western approach to the world, is the free market will allow for multiple different ways to handle this. The market will handle it. And you'll see religious AIs pop up, and you'll see dictatorial AIs pop up, and you'll see all kinds of political systems pop up, and new religions and different things that people will find comfort in different ways. And in the end, it'll balance itself out by itself, hopefully without too much cost and without too much heartache along the way. And if it does pan out, we will be in a much better place compared to any previous generation. We will, at the end of it, we will be very, very happy. But getting there is not easy.
Wow. Okay. Very, very interesting landscape that you've painted. And look, great food for thought. I think it's insightful. I'll need some time to think about that, actually. I'll need some time to think about that one.
That is a great compliment, and I appreciate it.
Mm, mm. I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions now, getting close to a wrap up. What skill will be the most valuable for marketers and leaders over the next 5 years?
Wow. Data, understanding data, how to use it, how to work with AI on data. It is not the data winner yet. It's going to come, but there's going to be a lot of trial and error associated with sort of self-serve BI work with AI as an intermediary. As it is today, we see examples of you feed AI a spreadsheet and ask it to analyze it. You think it knows how to do it. It doesn't. It knows how to write code, or it knows how to guess code that can analyze data, but it has no clue what it's doing. It doesn't understand data. It understands statistical probability of what should be the next word in a sentence, and the next word after that, and the next word after that. So as we have more and more data, as we need, the expectation is anybody can generate data or reporting with AI quickly without having to go through longer loops and go to other people in the organization. Well, if you have this stuff connected, you have AI, just figure it out, right? There is a lot more need for everybody to understand data and to understand how to spot, hey, no. You just eliminated half my spreadsheet and you didn't tell me. And that does happen now pretty much consistently. So that is the kind of stuff I think really everybody should know.
And data is truth, whereas what comes out of AI and everything needs to be validated. Whereas if you've got the base data and know how to use that to form your base opinions and base expectations and to make decisions from, then it's almost a validator for anything that might come in terms of AI interpretation from there. I think that's an excellent point. What's one practical piece of advice you'd give a team trying to integrate AI without losing trust?
Practical. Well, try not to mess it up too much. Don't give a good excuse for somebody to shut you down. I think being transparent about how you do things, don't try to hide it. Like some people will use AI and sort of hide the fact because they don't want people, they want to take credit for the work. I think the true credit should come from, look how I integrated AI and look how I did this and how I leveraged AI so smartly here. Bring as much transparency to what you're doing, show other people, let them see that they always can see what you're doing and they don't have anything to fear. I think the biggest fear comes from, what the heck is Daniel doing over there with AI? I need to put some guardrails on him because I don't understand. The more you open up and the more you show, the less resistance you're going to have and the more buy-in because the potential is so big.
Excellent. Excellent. And so then please finish this sentence. The companies that survive the AI wave will be the ones who
Dramatically change their business to improve their profit margins compared to the competitors.
got it. Excellent. Is there a particular preference that you have in terms of people getting in touch with you?
I think I love LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn, and I think it's a wonderful way to keep in touch over time. So yeah, LinkedIn is great.
Yeah, we'll have that link down there. Well, Daniel, I've got to say thank you very much. It's been a long conversation this morning, but one that certainly has been absolutely insightful. I've enjoyed it very much. So appreciate you coming on the chat.
Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful, and I appreciate it.
Excellent. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.